Well, hello and welcome everybody. I apologise to those of you that have been sitting there on the website waiting for this thing to start. Once again, whenever we take a break from things with the Hangouts and the show, things seem to change, and then it's never seems quite so easy to get things set up as quickly as possible. So we had some technical problems today getting started, but I do apologise for that. It's absolutely delightful to be back on the air, and those of you that are subscribed to our newsletter and following the website, you'll know some of the issues and problems and challenges that we've been facing over the summer period to keep the Unit UK and these broadcasts coming out to you. Of course, we do have some critical funding issues at the moment that really are keeping our backs against the wall. There are PayPal donation and subscription buttons all over our website, and we really do appeal to our audience to help us wherever you possibly can, because that makes a big difference.
Is it just me, or are you breaking up, Rick? Your
audio
appears to be breaking up from my end.
You must be your end, Peter.
Yeah, well, it's certainly. I'm not doing that deliberately. Speaking like this, I'm not doing that. So unless it's a bandwidth issue,
a lot of harmonics.
Like anyway, so we're back with Table Talk, and obviously some of the crew are here. I've got two of my fellow community members, because of course when none of us are paid employees anymore, so this really is the voluntary community coming to you. So joining me today is Roger Wright Morris. Hello, Roger. How are you?
Well,
I'm sorry, Rick. You're unintelligible to me.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Can you hear him, Roger?
Yep, loud and clear.
Yes.
Good stuff.
How about
good
you, Roger?
stuff.
How does it sound to you?
I can hear you quietly, Peter. Rick, can you speak?
Yes, I can. Yes, can you hear
It
this?
should be me then.
You're loud and clear.
Okay. Perhaps have you got something downloading or updates or something like that at your end, Peter? Have a look at that and see if you've got any machine downloading or torrenting anything.
It shouldn't be a problem anyway. I've got 100 megabit connection, so it shouldn't be a problem anyway.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well. Anyway, so joining me today is Roger and Peter, and so I'm just going to press on a little bit because we're just running into more trouble. Best thing to do is march forward, put your best foot forward, and we'll just rock on and see what happens. Well, of course, it's all over the news at the moment right now. Of course, Mr. Cameron's been up to Scotland today, along with Mr. Miliband and everybody else. Of course, the topic for tonight's Table Talk is Scottish independence. And of course, we're asking the question, well, what has that got to do with the EU? Obviously, we've got a week to go. What I'm going to do with us, chaps, is we're going to talk around the topic and allow you to bring your points of view forward and what you think. And at the end, I think we'll have a little wager as to whether you think it's going to be a yes vote or a no vote. But we'll do that at the end. Let me just pitch this out to you first of all, Peter, because I know you're going to bring some supporting evidence as well, that you're going to hope to do some screen share with us. But what's your take on this whole debacle at the moment, and how does this relate back to Europe?
Well, you use exactly the same word I was about to use. The whole thing is a complete debacle, and this is all down to Cameron's ineptness as a politician. Cameron originally styled himself as the heir to Blair, but he's desperate for people to like him. And he thought that he could get the kudos that Blair had when he first started. The trouble is, he's politically naive like a little child who puts his finger into a hot flame. Doesn't consider the consequences of what he does. In the same way that he and Sarkozy have caused so much foment in the Middle East, he's done the same thing in Scotland. He hasn't got the political ability that Salmon's got, and Salmon has completely run rings around him. Salmon is running this campaign, not Cameron. And the trouble is, it's all going to end in tears because it's so close together. the vote, that almost half of the population of Scotland are going to be sorely disappointed, whatever way it goes, whether it be a yes vote or a no vote. It's causing no end of financial instability to both this country and to the EU, for that matter. I read today that Standard Life are considering pulling out a large proportion of their presence in Scotland because to defend themselves against a yes vote. Both Shell and BP have warned Salmon that the oil reserves that he's so much relying on aren't anywhere near as good as he says they are. On top of that, there's a possibility he's not going to get as many as the oil fields that he wants. I don't know if you want to do it at this stage, but I've got a graphic showing just how they are distributed around the British Isles and North Sea.
I think I'm going to get you to keep your powder dry on that one for a moment there, because we had some input from Max in our community, Max Wolf, who passed on some information to us about BP as well.
Yeah.
But of course, that's a great opening take. Let's throw the same question to Roger. What's going on then, Roger? What do you make of all of this Scottish independence?
I think that the facts are rather less important to Salmon and the out team than the heart. It's really a question of the heart. And this was hardly a thing to be surprised at. And I think that really the finger of blame, if people wish to look at it that way, lies with Cameron in failing to ask the right questions in any referendum, if there was to be one at all. Namely, do you want more devolution? If so, would Devo Max be enough? Or do you want independence in any event? Or do you only want independence if you can become a member of the EU? 4 questions, perhaps along those lines, would have been useful.
Yeah, and for me, I've struggled all along from the very outset with this idea of independence, because what we have been seeing on our website in the news and all of the stories right from the very outset was this almost presumption that Scotland was simply going to, first of all, the presumption was that Scotland was just going to simply continue as a European Union nation member state. And of course, all of the information on our site shows that that this they termed it the European Economic Community, and I think that although they've changed the name, the nomenclature of that, the general public, the general population in Britain still thinks that it's largely just a trading community, and the politicians largely pitch it like that. But as Peter has put forward in his book, and as we know from all of the information that's on our site, it isn't at all. It's about creating this single federalized state. And I don't see how that can be compatible with an idea of an independent nation state, Scotland as an independent nation state, if it's actually simply going to become a federalized region. And I find my final aspect on that is I support that with the fact that there's been a Scotland or a Scottish region of Europe for for 2 decades and beyond. And so there's a piece of me that feels as though this has kind of been on the cards for a long time. Part of Blair's execution of devolution set it all up to be in this way. But I just don't think that it's anything like a sense of national independence for Scotland.
You may have noticed sorry, Roger, carry on.
I thought Rick was asking me what independence was, and I think that's a very good question. Nobody seems to have answered it. Scotland, of course, can't be independent with a currency, because first of all they'll have the pound, like Panama has a dollar, and then because of the Copenhagen criteria, they must and can only have the euro when they become a full de jure member of the European Union. They have no more effective lawmaking than we do at the moment, and the argument is that we have 70 or 80 or maybe even 90% of our laws which come from Europe, which leaves them with no say even on that, because they will have no commissioner and they will have no member of the Council of Ministers. But in due course, that will be put right, I suppose. But Scotland forgets that it is smaller than the UK and therefore will have even less influence than we have at the moment, and ours is minimal enough as it is. So where does this independence leave them? Well, I suppose they have no control over interest rates, whether with the pound or with the euro. They will be subject to, therefore, fiscal control from either the Bank of England or the ECB. But they keep going on about their health service, so no doubt they can concentrate on that. But it's very difficult to see what value this so-called independence is to a isolated small Scotland.
Yeah, it's become apparent during the week, actually, with some of the news stories I've been posting. One in particular, that MEPs consider that British votes are defeated 84% of the time. Now, bearing in mind that the UK is one of the larger groups who've got more votes going for them, with France and Germany and so on, and we can't get 84% of our legislation or our ideas through. Scotland, with only 5 million people, is going to have next to nothing vote. I mean, the UK vote is only about 8.6% effective. The Scottish vote will be worthless completely inside the EU. They're talking about being isolation from Westminster. They will be totally isolated from Brussels. And I can't for the life of me understand why they want to go into it.
Well, I mean, Roger talked about hearts, you know, and growing up, I had a lot of family that come from Scotland, and many of my family members live in Edinburgh. And I know as a child growing up there, the Scottish people have a tremendous sense of culture and a tremendous sense of nation. You know, would in actual fact make an excellent candidate, I think, for a truly independent sovereign nation. I think that the people are, in their hearts, there is a huge swathe of the Scottish people that simply want independence without considering any of the logistics that Roger and yourself are talking about, Peter. They simply just want it because it fulfills in their heart their emotional sense of nation and sense
the Braveheart syndrome.
Self.
The Braveheart syndrome, that's all it is, isn't it, really?
Well, Peter, I think we can do better than that, because if that's what they wanted, we could say to them, well, wait to the referendum, join the outers in the referendum, join in the Flexit route, and as the Flexit route develops, you can break away independently at that time. This would have been a better moment to do it. But they do seem to be keen on staying in Europe. So that option has clearly been discounted if it has been thought about.
Well, the strange thing is, we've got the first Scottish MEP for UKIP, which surprised me. There must be a groundswell there of anti-EU cynicism there, really. They want to get out of it, but they seem to be stuck between a rock and a hard place. Some want independence, but don't necessarily want to go into the EU. In fact, quite adamantly do not want to go into the EU. Others don't want independence and want to stay. And it's a complete mishmash. No one seems to really have defined what this independence is going to mean. It just seems as though heads or tails, basically. Someone's tossed a coin up in the air, and whatever way it comes down, that's how it's going to affect the 5 million people of Scotland. They're so close in the polls. As I said before, around half of the population of Scotland are going to be sorely disappointed. It's going to be completely against what they feel is the right thing to do. That's why the whole thing is so totally ill-conceived, because they should have given them, Salmon should have given them some definitive answers before such an important constitutional thing like this occurred. You need to know what will happen if you get independence. Will you be able to maintain your economy? I don't think they will, to be quite frank. When you consider that 24% of the workforce in Scotland is in the public sector, and that rises to 30% in the north of Scotland. I don't think they're going to be able to afford independence.
Let me interject a moment here, because where we're heading here is this question about the decision-making process, which is based upon the information that the Scottish people are being given now,
or lack of.
Exactly. Now we're obviously spending an enormous amount of our time focusing on Europe. And the things that are happening in the machinations of the EU specifically. We're very interested in the EU as a state institution. It's like me that there is a huge amount of information about the EU which doesn't seem to be getting through. So my question to each of you now, let me start with Roger for a moment. Just give me an evaluation on what your thoughts are about the mainstream media's coverage of the arguments for Nova and the arguments and the EU being in this campaign.
You broke up there, but I think if you would like me to concentrate on what the effect of Scotland is if they agree with the Commission to continue as a de facto member of Europe whilst the de jure full membership takes place, then I think we must assume that the trade, the freedom to trade will continue. It already has de facto UK Scottish laws and incorporates all the EU laws, so one must assume that de facto all new directives would automatically apply in Scotland without any of the UK opt-outs, as if the membership had been effective, even though it's only now applying as an own member. Schengen, therefore, will apply, so all refugees or people who should not be in Scotland will be a Scottish problem for them to deal with, and if they find themselves going south, we will have a problem. So England will have a big border problem. Scotland, of course, won't have a bank of last resort while it has the pound, and it won't probably get the euro borrowings until it's a member of the euro. So it's got a real problem for a few years. Yes?
I was going to say that would be particularly important if they, as Salmon has threatened to do, default on its percentage of the national debt. That will certainly affect their credit rating with
well, actually,
the IMF.
Peter, Salmon has a bigger problem than the national debt, because the Richard North's work on the flexible exit route it understands that there are financial commitments by the UK internationally and in Europe heading some 7 years ahead, because there's a commitment to pay our contribution, as a result of which regional grants are paid out, and these are all planned years in advance. So Salmon, whether he likes it or not, has got whatever percentage it's going to be of these future commitments.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. Well, I mean, it's obvious that Salmon hasn't thought this through. Your words, he's thinking with his head, his heart rather than his head. I can't help but think this is definitely going to go downhill if there's a yes vote. It really is. They just will not be able to afford to run the country. The West Lothian agreement is keeping them buoyant at the moment. They will lose that. They will be entirely on their own. And without any, I mean, both Europe and NATO told them it could take them years to get into either one of the groups. NATO probably won't like them anyway, because Salmond said it's going to be a nuclear-free zone in Scotland. And NATO will not like their Trident system being messed about with. They are in the north-east of Scotland because that's the best strategic position for the nuclear submarines to be in. And if Salmond forces them down to Devonport, they will be much less effective. And so NATO will not appreciate that. So they're just not going to get into these places that they so grandiosely admit to wanting.
Well, let me draw you back onto the campaign side of things for a moment. I know I broke up there before, but my question really to you now is, you know, what's your evaluation of the media and the media campaign on this, and how informed and how well informed do you think the Scottish people are, and do you think there's been fair coverage from Europe? Just before you answer that question, though, let me just mention to the people that are watching that you can comment and ask questions. You can do that via Twitter or Google Plus if you like, but via Twitter is the best way to do that at the moment. And if you just post a tweet with @the e-unit in there with your question or your comment, and I'll be able to keep an eye on that and bring that up for the panel to discuss. So yeah, Peter, just put your focus on your thinking hat, because you've been watching the news, you've been looking at what all the news channels are reporting for a no and for a yes. You know, what do you think of the reporting, and are the Scottish people being given you know, a good and well evaluated information about the EU and the implications for them? What's your take on it?
No, basically they've been bombarded by no vote propaganda from virtually all of the media. Some of the local newspapers up in Scotland are obviously for the yes vote, but certainly the mainstream media has bombarded them with all sorts of impediments to them continuing as a freestanding nation. They report what the banks say, they report what the EU says, what NATO says, but they have not actually explained the consequences of anything, much the same way as the media refuse to do to comment on the EU. They do not tell us the consequences of anything, merely what other people say. It's of no use to anybody.
Yeah.
Could I give you an example that springs to mind?
Please do.
My eyes have been opened a little bit. For example, what happens to the BBC? But what happens, and then what happens to roaming charges? Because if they're not in the EU, and therefore can roaming charges be completely uncontrolled? And what happens to the civil aeronautics? Because if they're not signed up to all the regulations, can any airline risk landing and taking off in Scotland? I mean, I'm out of my depth here, like I expect most people will be, but these questions should have been dealt with.
I'm not quite sure where you're coming from there, Roger. I didn't know there was a problem with airlines landing in Scotland.
There are none yet, but what happens when if they are out of the UK and it may and they're not, and therefore they are a new entity and haven't signed up to anything, therefore they've got to do so.
Yeah, well, Scotland's already part of the air traffic control system, obviously.
Well, why would it be if it was independent? It's got a lot of...
Well, no, I mean, it already is as part of the international air traffic system, whereby a plane is passed from one group to another. a relay system.
Let me chuck an example in, actually, that has been caused quite a lot of there's been quite a lot of problems with sort of two aspects of aviation that we've reported about lots on our website. One is about pilot hours, the working hours for pilots, and the implications for working time directive on them. But the second issue is a commercial one, but it does lend itself to the argument that Roger's making, because there are green taxes, these effectively carbon taxes that are imposed upon all European airlines. Now, if Scotland was outside of the EU and independent, then it could fly its planes without applying or by applying a lower or non-green tax. Now, that gives them a competitive advantage, and of course would mean that, you know, the best way to fly would be to take a plane from there to fly anywhere in the world. Now, we've got loads of stories on competing competing flight operators, those inside and outside of Europe, where you've got this. But that's an example. It's not quite in the same context of what Roger's talking about, but that's an example of the kind of thing that nobody's discussing.
As far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any international hubs in Scotland. So they will be limited to flying initially to somewhere in Europe. And it would not surprise me if Scotland tried to take advantage of that Europe would put a tax on Scottish Airlines landing in Europe, Schiphol, Amsterdam, whatever, because they haven't got an international hub in Scotland at all. They can't fly outside of Europe initially. They have to do a leapfrog situation into Europe, whether it be the UK, which has got international hubs, or into Europe.
Peter,
the thing is, you can't just suddenly pick up an international hub. There's agreements between airlines. They're allocated international slots, so they can't suddenly pick up on one. So they will be controlled in effect by the EU.
Let's not get too bogged down in the detail, because the overarching thing that we're trying to show here is the difficulties.
That's purely an answer to your question, Rick. That was all.
Rick, can I just give you the summary? If they are a virgin new country, they are not a member of the World Trade Organization. They don't get involved with global governance, the ISO. They've got no foreign policy mechanisms. There's no defense. There's no customs operation. There's no anti-dumping measures. Many thousands of regulations and organizations all have to be joined. How is that going to be dealt with? No thought seems to have been given to that.
Well, Salmon said that he thought it was going to cost 250 million quid to set up the infrastructure, but latest estimates are that it's 2.5 billion and rising to set up the basic infrastructure to run as an independent country. Customs, police, fire, whatever. It's going to cost an awful lot of money. They've got to find up front to get this sorted. So I don't think it's just going to. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Rick, one way of looking at this is it's the other side of the coin for the complexity of the UK coming out of Europe.
Yes, I mean, for example, I think Peter's identified that at the moment there are 111,000 laws and regulations that apply to all EU member states, and some of those are going to be good. Some of them, whether you agree or disagree, but those create a social and civil framework that we live by today, because 80-odd% of those laws apply to us. And of course, if you're starting from absolute clean sheet, then what do? Are you going to pick and choose what you want out of those? Are you going to create all of your own new laws? Create all of that institution, that sovereign institution? I don't think that that's being offered to Scotland at all. This idea of a sovereign nation state, anyway. You know, because my take on this is that this is independence from Westminster, but subservience to Europe. And as Peter said, subservience to Europe with no voice. You know, if 65 million people in the UK gets you 8% of the vote in the European Parliament, then 5 million people doesn't even get you close to 1%, or probably around 1% of the vote.
Didn't
no voice.
Didn't Rompuy say that it was not at all certain that they would be permitted to be a de facto member of Europe?
Yes.
And if he said that, and that was, I think, last year, that there has been...
Barroso, actually. It's Barroso. Barroso said that. It's quite fact. Whatever it takes, it's going to take years.
And therefore, they've had plenty of warning of the complex problems that we have indicated. But the answer is, none of this seems to have permeated the UK media, but the Scottish media, I have no idea.
They seem to be burying their heads in the sand, Roger.
Well, let's just move on to. But that's a good little segue, and segue away from that. We'll come back and revisit this political landscape as we start to summarise where we think it's going to go at the end. But let's just explore some of these resource issues a little bit more. I know, Peter, you've got some notes on this, so I'm going to hand it to you in a second. But Max Wolf sent an email into us, or posted to our community, about a story that was on Newsnet Scotland, and basically the point of the story was that the BP oil, British Petroleum, has suspended production of the Clare Ridge oil field, and the key points here is that BP had invested £4.5 billion into Clare Ridge project. It expects to be a field that will deliver some 640 million barrels of recoverable oil and see up to 120,000 barrels per day at peak. Estimates put the amount of oil in the reserves at 7 billion barrels, or an equivalent. And BP announced the startup of the Clare Ridge Twin Bridge oil field had been delayed by 1 year, which it had put down to the work being carried out by the South Korean fabricator. Of course, rumours spread like wildfire about Clare Ridge being essentially being given the kibosh by David Cameron, who went up into Shetland on a secret visit to actually see what was going on for himself. And then this came out in the news that, of course, the oil field was going to be delayed or shut down. And so the question is this, you know, energy is of critical importance. We've got some great reports that you've put together on the website about energy and where it comes from. We're largely self-sufficient in the UK with gas and oil, provide our own energy. So what's the situation going to be if we do end up with an independent Scotland? And what do you think about this Clare Ridge story, Peter? Break it down for us.
I think the Clare Ridge thing is possibly to do with the fact that most of the easily recovered oil has been carried out. There is oil there, but now it's getting more and more expensive to recover it. But that aside, I think Salmond has been convincing, or trying to convince, the Scottish public that they will be able to live on oil revenues. But it's with the declining or the volatile price of oil in the world, you cannot run an economy with so much volatility. You've got to have a sort of a steady mean level that you can budget on, and Scotland is just not going to have that. If you don't mind, I'm going to pull up a graphic showing the oil fields around the North Sea.
Yeah, please do. And then, will you talk us through the graphic as well, Peter, and give us the lowdown? So, because we'll do an audio version of this that people can download on their website and listen and stuff.
Yeah, at the moment, I am trying to work out. This is the first time we've used this technology, isn't it?
Okay, well, if you have a look at that for a moment, I'll just chat with Roger a moment about this stuff. What do you think about the division of resources, Roger? I mean, there's got to be a whole hat full of problems there in dividing all of these things up.
I thought
what
it
do you
was
what's your take?
I thought it was firmly established in international law. I recall that when Biafra tried to break away from Nigeria, they wanted the oil, and what happened was that they were entitled to no more than they had beforehand. But it's really not my strong point, and I imagine that the same percentage that Scotland gets now, they'll get in the future.
Now, Rick, I don't know if it's coming up on your screen. It appeared to on mine.
Yes, I can see it really well.
You can see a map there, right? Okay. Now, if you look at the map of the border between England and Scotland, it runs roughly southeast to northwest.
Okay.
Salmon is gambling that he is going to be able to claim territorial waters in a strict east-west line, i.e. the dark green broken line, which takes in most of the oil fields, which are the blue area. The red ones are the Norwegian oil fields, by the way, but the blue ones are British owned. But the normal convention for deciding territorial waters is in a direct line parallel to their border, which will be the sort of dirty yellow broken line, which cuts that in half. So
But hang on a second. Peter, what about the international law that I just recited, which I only understood generally, but not specifically? They won't change the proportions that they have now in the future, in respect of existing wells.
I'm not sure what you mean. I'm talking about the split between the UK and Scotland, or England and Scotland. These lines represent, the green line represents Salmon's idea of the split of territorial waters, but the yellow line is the conventional method of determining territorial waters, which goes right through the middle of the main part of the oil fields, which will leave in that main group 50% of it within the UK. Plus, of course, we've got all the gas fields down by the wash there. So Salmon is selling porkies to his people if he thinks he's going to get all that oil. And as I said before, it's a very bad way to base an economy on oil production unless you're an Arab state. It just doesn't work.
But that's a good point that Roger's made, and I think I understand. I think for me, I understand the distinction a little bit, because if you ignored the oil fields for a moment and took a division of territorial waters following that yellow line that you'd put up there, then what you could say is that any new discoveries and subsequent exploitation of oil would belong to England if it was south of the yellow line, and Scotland if it was north of the yellow line. But of course, you've got contract law and the international law, which is what Roger's talking about, is where you have got an existing find that is now already being exploited. You can't suddenly change the nation states and then start hiving that off based on new lines.
But aren't you talking about
new lines that you draw in the sand?
In that respect, following on from your argument, Salmon would be doing just that, wouldn't he? At the moment, the contracts are between the oil companies and the UK. If Scotland becomes an independent country, they are talking about changing the contracts, not us.
What do you make of that then, from a legal point of view, Roger? There's got to be some weight in the existing contracts, hasn't there?
I really don't know. It must be part of the deal process, but at the moment, the percentage of that oil must go, and whether it's 10 or 50%, towards Scotland's benefit, I imagine.
But it'll only be tax revenue, won't it?
I don't know.
The oil companies own the fields and pay royalties and tax.
That's quite right. If there's a really good book by Greg Palast called Vulture's Picnic, which is really worth a read. and he goes into all of this, and there's a kind of whole sequence of events that takes place with the IMF and infrastructure investment, and the oil companies come in who then own the oil that comes out of the ground, and they make agreements with the countries to pay taxation. But yeah, you know, the bottom line is that BP in the North Sea, it's BP as an independent company, a shareholder-driven company that owns the oil out of the ground. We are only talking about the tax revenues on it, I believe.
And royalties.
To be true.
Yeah, but yes, the question is the percentage of the horse trading. And if you're looking at assets and liabilities, and for example, the obvious way of looking at it would be what percentage of the national debt. Why wouldn't the horse trading say, well, if Scotland's going to take 12% of the national debt, it gets 12% of the taxation of the North Sea?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is just vastly complicated.
It's entirely nebulous, Rick. It's entirely nebulous. What Salmon is selling to the Scottish people is a totally nebulous concept. He cannot guarantee one way or the other.
Well, now, if us three fellows chatting away here one evening talking about the ins and outs of this Scottish independence, and with our limited research and limited resources, which we'd really like you guys out there to help us with, but with our limited resources, if we can draw these kinds of conclusions and put these kinds of arguments across, why has Cameron not done that? Why has Miliband not done that? Why are these things not being really spelt out as core clinical issues to the Scottish people?
Suppressed by the media, and that's not a conspiracy theory. They are deliberately suppressed by the media. I've tried on a number of occasions to bring things out, and it gets totally ignored. I've tried it with MEPs, I've tried it with MPs, I've tried it with newspapers. They do not want to hear anything that's detrimental to the EU, apart from a few papers like the Express, which is pro-EU.
But why isn't David Cameron talking about that argument that Roger just put forward there, where he said, well, okay, if you want to take 12% of the debt, then you get 12% of the asset. So you're going to have 12% of the liabilities. You equally get 12% of the asset. That's such a good argument. Why, as Alistair Darling, who's supposed to be, well versed in economics, why has he not been putting those arguments across and getting that across to the Scottish people? It all seems to be a bit kind of nebulous and a bit woolly and a bit and rather plummy as well. I noticed we've not sent anybody with a vaguely northern accent to Scotland. We've sent people who are talking with plums in their mouths to persuade the Scottish people that it would really be a jolly good idea if they just stayed in the UK.
They sent the idiot Prescott up there today, and they completely ruined everything. But that's another matter. But the point is, the whole thing's been done arse backwards. The people in Scotland will be asked to buy a pig and a poke. They don't know what they're buying. They should have been given all the information, pros and cons, before the referendum. They're not getting that. So they cannot, in all honesty, give an informed opinion on it. As Rogers quite rightly pointed out, they are going to be voting with their hearts and not their heads. And they will find there's going to be cheers. I mean, we're in a ludicrous situation where we've got Scottish people in England aren't allowed to vote, and yet in Scotland they've got kids and EU nationals voting. Why? How can that be right? I mean, this referendum is akin to a general election and should only be open to...
That's not on the agenda. I mean, what is on the agenda is Scotland and the EU. The errors of the past really, they've gone. But Rick, if I could just read part of a letter from Edward Spalton, the Honourable Secretary of the Campaign for an Independent Britain, which is on his website. And it said, in debate, Mr. Salmon appears to be just as ignorant as most Westminster politicians on matters concerning the European Union.
Yeah.
Any country applying to join the EU has to satisfy the Copenhagen criteria, which include the obligation of changing to the euro currency. Full stop. Anything else is fanciful blabber. But, more seriously, as a small EU country in the Eurozone, Scotland could easily suffer the same fate of Slovakia, a country of similar population. Slovakia adopted the euro and kept to all the rules, one of which was that no country could be made liable for the debts of another. Suddenly, that rule was changed, and Slovakia was told it had to help and bail out much richer countries which had broken every rule in the book. The Slovak government rebelled for 3 days before being dragooned into line by Martin Schulz, president of the EU Parliament, who hectored and lectured the Slovakian ministers. How many people do you represent? He demanded. I am president of the European Parliament and represent all the people of Europe. Such
My stick's bigger than yours.
Is the destiny of an independent Scotland with the EU.
I couldn't agree more. They could be completely out of their depth.
That's I mean, what a really great point, and we see that, you know, in our reporting all the time, where, you know, where when push comes to shove, out come the technocrats and the, you know, the senior ministers from the Commission, and start whacking people. Interestingly, we've just got a comment here that's coming from Mikhail on Twitter. And he Better Off Out campaign, and he says that that this has been planned for a long time from the start, and it's an attack on UK infrastructure, and it's design and is a design for EU expansionism.
Couldn't agree more. As I've said to you on many occasions, it's divide and conquer situation.
Well, as far as the divide is concerned, without 41 Labour MPs, we'll have a better chance of getting a Conservative government this time, and therefore the referendum. And if the majority, and we're not sure, of the Scots prefer Europe, we'll have a better chance of winning that referendum and getting out of Europe. So if they are going independent, there are a lot of blessings to follow.
And I'm not, so that's interesting, because I would see that differently to you. I mean, I think that I see this as part of a divide and conquer strategy, and I sort of, I see that it makes it, if we've got an independent Scotland, the arguments for the isolation of Britain, or, well, in fact, the arguments for the isolation of England, it would then be, will come thick and fast about, well, we can't stand on our own, you know, we're, you know what I mean, we've been divided, and so on and so forth, and I think that those arguments would resonate really strongly with the people that are making them nervous.
Rick, do you mind if you would you amend that matter, because my friends in Northern Ireland and Wales don't mind being called the UK, the remaining UK, but they don't like you talking about England.
Well, yeah, absolutely, sure. I would be happy to talk about that. In fairness, I kind of called it Britain and then UK, and kind of got a bit lost as to what to call it. So yeah, let's go with the remainder.
To be fair, Roger, the Scottish argument is with England, not with Wales and Northern Ireland.
Let's ask a question. I mean, so what of this devolution then? Let me throw this in there. What happens if Scotland vote yes and decide to go independent? What will the Welsh do?
The Welsh weren't happy with their assembly anyway. It was actually a complete stitch-up by the Labour Parliament. Rhodri Williams was his name, was the first Welsh First Minister. he was a placeman, but the Welsh, they actually fiddled the referendum for the Welsh Assembly. The Welsh as a whole did not want a Welsh Assembly. And look at the mess they're into now already with the health service and so on.
Well, yes, but I mean, I've spent quite a bit of time in Wales, and the people, the people of Wales are lovely people, and again have a tremendous sense of culture and sense of nationhood.
I was married to a girl from Llanelli. Way back in my youth.
Rick,
what do you make of it, Roger?
Coming back to your question, I think it's a very good question. Having seen Devo Max now offered to the Scots, I see no reason why Northern Ireland, if they would like more responsibility and reduction of power at the centre, then they would go for it, and ditto Wales, which is no bad thing, because the Conservatives have professed to have more localised responsibility. Well, this is what they should now get on and do, which is a little more devo, even in England, down to the county councils, where the money is given to them to spend, provided it's done responsibly. Now, how you deal with the proviso is another issue.
I think it's the thin end of the wedge, to be quite honest. Blair started this with all these regional governments. Do you remember Prescott tried to force the North West to be a regional government? They didn't want to know anything about it. The trouble is, the nonsense with Scottish devolution is causing this trouble now. We are heading for a complete breakup of the UK if we're not very, very careful. I'm all for devolution of powers, but with the proviso that we stay together as a nation. That's my personal view. It's nothing to do with jingoism. It's more to do with practicality. If we have, I mean, bearing in mind, Ireland's already got Stormont. It was suspended for many years because of the Irish Troubles, but now it's back, and they're pretty much autonomous over there. They can pretty much do what they want. There are certain laws they've got to comply with from the UK as a whole, but they pretty much do their own thing in Stormont. We've got Irish, I won't say the word, but Sinn Féin are equally as strong in Stormont as any of the old unionist parties. So I think they've got a pretty fair amount of autonomy there, in much the same way as Scotland. But I can't see Northern Ireland ever wanting to secede from the UK, because then they would be in a very vulnerable position with Southern Ireland.
Well, it's very interesting when you... it's really interesting when you start thinking about this in a historical context. The more that I've kind of dug and investigated and researched into the EU and looking back at its history, and our film that's on our website, Betrayed, if people haven't looked at that, then do look at that. Trevor Coleman does a really good presentation about the history of Britain and UK's relationship with the EU since 1972. But one of the things that Churchill talked about in the historical records, when in actual fact, prior to the real kind of establishment of the European group, was that there was this vision on the table to bring about a single united Europe, so that this would effectively stop war. And one of the things that was talked about a great deal in those times was the fact that Britain, UK, Great Britain would have nothing, would very likely be very resistive of it, and that culturally we would want to be strongly independent, and that you would not be able to create a united federalized European superstate whilst Great Britain remained intact. That was the thinking back in the 50s.
Let's put the subject of Winston Churchill to bed. He said, we are in Europe, but not of Europe. What he meant was that the mainland Europe does need to amalgamate to keep from conflict. But we as an island nation do not need to be a member of a federalised Europe. We are quite capable of running our own affairs, but most of the wars that have occurred over the last several hundred years have been between autocrats wanting their own way. We've had democracy in this country for many hundreds of years. Europe does not have that, and especially now that the Eastern Bloc has become part of it, the whole thing is so totally diverse, for want of a better word, but no country there thinks the same way as their neighbour. And that is why...
Well, I agree with the statement about Churchill. I mean, what you said there, my kind of limited reading and history as a topic for me has become fascinating when I've been able to put it into context rather than just being names, places and dates and so on and so forth. Being able to put it into context and see it and read about it like that. And I agree with you. I think I agree with that interpretation of what Churchill was saying when he spoke about that back at the time. It wasn't Churchill that was saying this, though. This was the people in Europe, the pro-federalist establishment, if you like, the people like Jean Monnet, for example, whose vision it was to create this united Europe. And there, you know, it wasn't a fear per se. It was a very clear statement that more than one person said, which was that whilst you have got Great Britain as it is, its sense of cultural nationhood, its sense of a sovereign independent nation, would make it impossible to assimilate it into a European federal superstate. And I find it fascinating that there seemed to be no real... I really struggled to understand the idea of devolution and why on earth we were doing that. And first of all, why on earth we were spending such vast amounts of public money. And if you haven't seen the enormous oak doors at the Scottish Parliament, I had a friend of mine who passed away just not too long ago, who actually was a carpenter that worked on the Scottish Parliament, and the tales that he had to say about wasted money and cost overruns is just unbelievable. I never understood why we were spending all of that money to create these parliaments when we got an established parliament in Westminster that had been operating so successfully as a united kingdom for 350. That this has come about, and what I would say is that, you know, the UK Independence Party at a party conference were having a conversation like this about the breakup of UK into its separate entities about 4 years ago. And now we find ourselves, here we are with this independence vote. And there's a piece of me that looks at this timeline unfolding over a period of time and just makes me ask the question as to whether, it does look like that there's been a deliberate stepping towards this idea of pushing this into this position. The media isn't talking about the power and the control that the EU will have. The media isn't talking about the minuscule voice of a dormouse that the Scottish people will have once assimilated into a federal Europe. It's not talking about that at all. It's appealing to this hearts and minds diktat that Salmon's putting forward, and there's a piece of me that sees something very nefarious and sinister going on here. What do you make of that?
Put it in context. We were refused 3 times by de Gaulle to be allowed to join the common market. It wasn't until he died we actually got into it. The reason being, I mean, I have no joy in my thoughts of de Gaulle at all, but I believe that he was astute enough to realise that the United Kingdom would not fit into a federalised Europe. I think federalism is a great idea for Europe, I really do, because it will reduce a lot of the conflict that's been going on for several hundred years, but they are better suited to it. We are not. And that, I believe, is why, my personal belief, is why de Gaulle refused us 3 times to join the common market, because it's always been the intention to be a federal Europe.
Greg, would that be a good moment for you to summarise?
Yes, I think it would. In actual fact, that would be a very good point to do that. Thank you, Roger. So, well, for those of you that have been watching this evening, first of all, let me apologise and say I'm sorry for the delay. We had 1 or 2 stressful technical issues, as we normally do, or as we have on many occasions with this technology. So please do bear with us. The show will be back again, and I'll give you some more dates about that in a moment. But let's just throw a wager around for where we think we are on this. So, you know, in summary, which way do you think it's going to go, Peter? Do you think Scotland's going to vote yes? Do you think they're going to vote no?
I think, pushing the boat out, I think they will go yes. I really do. The only difference between the SNP and the BNP is one letter of an acronym. And there's an awful lot of very vicious stuff going on up there. It's been going on for a number of years. There is a lot of jingoism against the English state up there. Some people fit in, others don't. It depends on the area you live in. But yes, I think the SNP will literally force a yes vote.
Roger, what do you think? What do you feel on this? What are you betting?
Well, there has been no discussion in detail about any facts, reality, or any of the topics we've tried to cover today. It's all been hearts and minds. Ergo, it'll be a big yes, and they will learn in the future what they should have learned before they made the decision, which of course is not, as Cameron said, an election. You can change your mind in 5 years. This is it. So I feel sorry for them, but that should give us an impetus to move out of Europe, Northern Ireland, Wales and England, and recover our independence, at the same time enjoying the benefits. And the way of doing that is in that very good piece of work done by Richard North and the Bruges Group, the Flexit route to the Britain exit. And I wonder if you can flag that up in your notes next time.
Absolutely, I will. So I'll put.
What about you, Rick? You haven't said anything yet.
Yeah, I'll summarise my position in a moment, but I'll just for you, Roger. We're going to look at the Flexit document. I'm going to put a table talk show together to look at the Flexit document and the Norwegian option. We're going to make the Flexit document available on our website so people can find out about that and do some coverage on it. Be delighted if you could join us on Table Talk and we can explore that a little bit more. So be reassured, we will be revisiting that in due course, and sooner rather than later, Roger. We'll come back to that one. My take in summary, well, gents, is a unanimous. If this was the X factor, the candidate, an independent Scotland, has got 3 yeses, because I feel the same way too. I think that the reason why the Scottish people are going to vote yes is because I think that the mainstream political machine in Westminster has completely miscalculated and misunderstood the hearts and minds of the Scottish people. The Scottish people have always been a fiercely independent nation, and always had a draw towards being independent. The second thing is that I think that the execution of the No campaign has been politically very weak. Very, very weak indeed. I think there has been the wrong choice of people sent to fight the campaign. I think sticking Alistair Darling up there with Salmond was a mistake. I think the timing of the message delivery has almost been deliberately incompetent. And this last blast of Cameron and Miliband and Prescott going up there waving flags at this point has actually done, as Salmond says, has done more to solidify and galvanise a potential yes vote in Scotland. And above all else, while they have executed this political incompetence in the No campaign, as we've discussed earlier on in this show today, at no point have any of these facts or important, crucial, critical issues for an independent Scotland been discussed or even given any limelight whatsoever. So the people are voting completely hearts and minds. They are being given poor information, and they've been failed by the political establishment. And I think it will be an outstanding yes vote. And people are going to stand back and go, "Oh, we didn't expect that." Well, this show did expect that. We, you know, us three guys, we're doing this analysis and this research all each day, every day, and it says something to me when each one of us is firmly sitting in the yes.
And please don't go away with the idea that we are happy with the result. We are not. We are not gloating in the least. In fact, I suspect all three of us are extremely sad at the prospect, because we've all got contacts in Scotland, and I'm going to feel extremely sorry for them. It's not a doom thing. It's a result of a lot of thinking that they are buying a pig in a poke deliberately, and they do not understand what's going to come up and bite them. They really do not. Living on the promise of oil revenue is not the way to go, and they no longer have the industry to stand alone by themselves. And I feel desperately sorry for the Scottish people.
Well, so that's our take on it. It just remains for me to say thank you to you, the viewers, for joining us, and for the people making the comments on Twitter. So thank you for taking the time to listen to the show. If you have got comments or thoughts or even letters or articles on this topic, then do feel free to get in touch with us via the website. Write in and send us your comments. We're actively looking for letters and comments and articles, and we will post them up onto our website, and they will be acknowledged. So do get in touch with us. Our Google Plus community is growing quite rapidly, and it's getting more vibrant all the time with new commentators and new people getting involved. Peter works very, very hard posting all the stories into the community. So do feel that you can engage, make comments, even if it's just simply to look through the articles and click on +1. That just lets us know that you've read the article, that you've seen it, that you're interacting, and because that community will grow. And did you want to make a comment about the community, Peter?
Yes, just one thing. If you're going to reply on a comment to an article I've put up, please do try to be polite. I try to occasionally.
Yeah, good stuff. So do get in touch with us there. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at the E-Unit, and you can post comments there. And of course, visit our website and make sure you sign up to our daily newsletter so you get all of the news. And of course, thank you very much to Roger for coming and joining us and giving his input. And I hope that you'll be able to come back and join us some more in the future with your valuable input, Roger.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Nice to see you again,
okay,
Roger.
So
take care of yourself.
Good night.
Cheerio. Okay, right. So to everybody out there, thank you very much, and we will see you in the second week of October. I believe will be the next date. But we'll keep you posted via email, and look out for the announcements in the Table Talk section of our website. Just remains for me to say that it's been a pleasure, and it's a delight to be back doing this again and getting another Table Talk out there. So have a good evening, and we'll see you all soon.
Good night.